All right, welcome everybody to the NFL, or excuse me, the ATB NFL Live Show. Don't want to just say NFL Live Show. We're not the NFL Live Show yet.
Yet.
No, but joining us as always is myself and Zach here. If you watched our Thursday night live stream, that was interesting. We'll put it. The game wasn't exactly the way that we thought it was going to be, but it was still a fun game overall. I think an interesting one. So,
Yeah.
but we're back today to talk about a couple things. Mainly, our first episode of a series we're going to be doing throughout the rest of the season and probably somewhat into the off season in some ways about how to save some of the worst NFL teams currently going. And this year, there's a lot of them. There's a lot of teams that aren't so good. And you could argue who's the worst, the best, whatever of those group. But today we're starting with the Jacksonville Jaguars, and it's for a particular reason. And we'll kind of get into that here in a little bit. But Zach, how are we feeling about trying to save the Jaguars? Is that too tall of a task for us to start off with? Or
I don't think
good?
I don't think it's too tall of a task, but there's a lot of things fundamentally about the organization that will absolutely have to change. So it's not a difficult thing, but it's definitely not going to be easy.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at with it too. There's talent on this roster, and we'll get into what they need to add, what type of players they should be going after, all that stuff when we get into that. But this is one of the more talented teams that is in that cluster of like the 2 and 3 win teams.
Yes.
So that'll be very interesting. A lot of the problem there is what it's kind of been for a while now, which is coaching, culture, schematics, like a lot of stuff that just isn't working for what they've built and what they were trying to build. And there's plenty of reasons for that. But let's kick off with just some general topics I wanted to kind of touch on today that I think are going to be interesting moving forward in the season. And in some cases this week specifically. We'll start with the Panthers. They look more like an NFL team in recent weeks. And Bryce Young looks more like an actual NFL quarterback. Maybe not a good one yet, quite so, but he's at least playing the position in a way that allows them to win games in a way that he hadn't really at all until these last couple of games. So they seem like they might be on the right track to at least maybe have a chance of him being the starter for a while. I don't see him ever living up to the first overall pick. It just doesn't seem super likely, but it at least looks like somebody they can throw out there and have some success with.
Yeah, and I mean, you got to look back at. I mean, they weren't really outside of the first win against the Raiders, who are in equally a bad situation. Andy Dalton wasn't playing all that great, so they really had to go back to Bryce Young. And at this point, is he gonna lead you to a win or not? That's really your only options here, especially with how the couple games under Dalton looked. Although, shout out to Chuba Hubbard because he is killing it right now. He is doing everything he can to keep the offense viable. Absolutely went off against the Giants last week. So they get a little bye week, and then they'll take on the Kansas City Chiefs at home when they come back.
That'll be fun.
That'll be fun. Yes, it'll be interesting to see what happens in that. But they're looking better, but they just have so many holes that, I mean, win over New York, win over New Orleans. You can get those, but down the stretch, you've got Kansas City, Tampa, you got to play Tampa twice, Philadelphia, Dallas, Arizona, and Atlanta. Like, that's a very hard schedule for them, I feel like.
Yeah. I mean, I doubt they pick up more than 1, maybe 2 more wins the rest of the way, but I just think it's good
I would be amazed if they get 1.
Yeah. That's kind of the thing. It's like you could beat a Dallas team that's quarterbacked by one of Cooper Rush.
Oh, fair. Okay, never mind. Yeah,
that might be possible. But I'm more thinking this team at least looks like they have some sort of foundation to build off of now, and like
they have a hope for or a reason for optimism.
Yeah, the offensive line I think has played really well all season, which is a huge boon for them because that was kind of their biggest issue last year. And that's why, a lot of people, including myself, thought that Bryce Young might at least look more like an NFL quarterback this year. Didn't work out for him at first, but Dalton came in, kind of gave him a breather. And I think he's realized now that, okay, I can just play my game and I don't have to worry about looking over my shoulder the whole time or looking in front of me the whole time, waiting for the guy to come through and kill me like he did last year. So they at least have something to work with. Obviously, Hubbard is huge. He's been a huge boon for them this year. Paying him money is something that maybe a team like them normally I wouldn't recommend because they're not quite in that range. But he's something to look forward to offensively, right? Like he's something
Well, I think the fact of the matter is, whether he's honest with himself or not, David Tepper sees the future of this team over the next couple of seasons and understands what's going on. And if you've got a guy who's willing to come in and be the face of your organization while you're trying to figure it out, why not pay him a little bit of money for that hardship? Because it's definitely not going to be easy on him. I mean, unless something crazy happens between him and the organization, I could see Hubbard ending up being like a single franchise player, and just from the years of indebted like work, like he's just going to be loved. And like, I mean, what Christian McCaffrey would have been before they traded him to the 49ers.
Maybe, and I obviously had a lot of the reason too that people were kind of questioning the move.
Like a Jonathan Stewart.
Jonathan Brooks specifically, they drafted him.
Yes.
Yeah, I was thinking of him. Like they drafted him this past year. There was expectations that he would be the lead back once he got healthy. Now we'll see how that workload ends up splitting, but we could be looking at like a Detroit situation, right, where Hubbard is a little bit more of the powerful back, whereas Brooks is going to be more of that dynamic runner. So maybe you get a combination of those two there. So I don't think, again, that doesn't really bother me too much. But in general, like they need to obviously add to the receiver room. They're getting good contributions from guys like Jalen Coker you didn't expect.
Yes,
really Get has looked the part as a first round pick. Now, granted, not as much volume as some of the other guys, but he's played well when given opportunities.
Well, they only also have 4 on the roster at the moment. So
yeah, it's kind of barren there. But in general, like there's things to be excited about offensively for the Panthers, and then on defense, they just need to get their guys back and also find some new pieces on the defensive line, especially because this is not an NFL caliber defense right now. It just isn't roster wise, so they just need to kind of work through who can stick on this roster moving forward, and then probably really heavily attack that part of the roster this offseason. We'll talk about them at some point as well.
Yes.
That's definitely a big one. Another thing, and this is kind of where I wonder if it doesn't happen this week, when will it happen? And we're talking about the Chiefs, right? So they're sitting at 9-0. It's a weird 9-0. It's not that different to me in a lot of ways from the Steelers' 11-0 start from 2020, where it feels like a weird, like they're not that great of a team in terms of the on-field product, but they win in specific ways and they don't let other teams beat them. They make other teams beat themselves. And that's nothing to take. I'm not taking anything away from the Mahomes of the world and Andy Reid and all those guys, but there just isn't a lot to work with offensively, right? It's really, they have to manufacture a lot of yards and points right now. And Hopkins has helped a little bit, stuff like Kelsey's got going a little bit. But until they start getting like Pacheco back soon here, or maybe Rashee Rice if he can come back healthy, this offense is kind of very much one that isn't going to get you a lot of points probably in most weeks.
Well, it's continuing the trend that we've seen over the past few seasons that, I mean, the offense continues to get worse, but they have Mahomes and they're able to make the plays. Although yes. I think the bigger thing for them is they're able to make the plays on defense to
the defense
shut down opponents. And I mean, it hasn't really mattered. I think it's been very interesting. The weeks that they've needed the offense to step up, they stepped up.
Yep.
The weeks that they've needed the defense to really hone in and shut things down, they shut things down. I'm not as like, I think eventually there are certain teams that you have to look at and you're like, they know how to win. It doesn't matter like what it looks like and what the season's been like. They are going to make the plays to win the game. And if there's any team that I feel like that there is right now, that is the Kansas City Chiefs and the Lions. Those are the two teams.
Those are the two.
That I'm like, it does not matter what happens. It does not matter whatever. If they have a shot in the fourth quarter to come back and win this game, they're going to come back and win this game. Yes, did it take a miraculous blocked field goal for this last one to go through? Yes. But the Broncos also have a nasty defense. And it's not like they were playing against a slouch, like some random team that, like, yes, is the offense not that great? It's not. But you're also playing against one of the best defenses in the league. Like, it would make sense that they struggle in that game. So I guess I'm not as sold on them being as down. I think the issues for the Bills defensively are really going to have an effect this week and make this a lot closer than a lot of people think. Because at the end of the day, I don't really feel like the offense is that bad. Kareem Hunt stepped in really well and been able to kind of replace some of the production that Pacheco has left there for anybody to take over. Carson Steele hasn't quite developed into what you would have hoped. But
I mean, he's a late round
expectations
pick.
for what he was going to do. If anything, you just really are kicking yourself about some of the signings on the wide receivers. But even then, like
injuries is you can't.
Exactly. Were these starting to hit a little bit every now and then? He's getting catches every week. Smith-Schuster's back this week. He has a rapport already. Rice will get back at some point. Pacheco's coming back. If the defense holds, this team is set up to continue to go. I think the bigger thing now that you have to look out for is what is the drop-off with having Butker on the IR and Schrader taking over for the next 4 weeks, because Butker is a very automatic kicker. What is the drop-off going to be there with Schrader taking over?
That's something else you have to consider too, because a big part of their success is their special teams as well, including him. So it's to me, I think the Bills are the first team that they've played since the Ravens where I'm like, okay, this is a team that you certainly, if you lose to, no one's going to be like, oh man, that was kind of a surprise to me that you lost. Like, so that's why I feel like this is the week where if they can make it happen again before all those pieces start coming back, how far can they push this thing before they do eventually lose a game? Because I do not think they're going to win the rest of their games. I do not think so. I think they're not good enough, in my opinion, to do that. They have never gotten really that close. I mean, they've been 15-2, I think, before, or 15 and whatever it would have been. But it's really hard to do that in the NFL. Obviously, it's only happened a handful of times that they've even gotten a chance to do something like that. But if it's not this week, I do wonder what week it's going to be. There's a couple games coming up in the next 5 weeks after that might be tough for them. But I'm not trying. I am a Steelers fan, so I will say this. I think that game could be very interesting because of the way these teams play. They're very similar.
Well, I mean, Denver part 2 at Denver the last week of the season.
So there's that. But I think before that, it could get interesting. If the Bills don't take them down this week, they could push it for a while here. So we'll see. But yeah, that's an interesting thing to consider because, again, we know that this team isn't like 9-0 good necessarily overall, but they're 9-0 tested in this way that they can win games in just about every way that a team can win games.
Yes.
So that's a good sign for them moving forward. Because again, I think they're only going to get better from here, most likely, just with the guys coming back. So
guys coming back in, and as I said, guys finally showing up.
Yeah. So that's if you're hoping for a non-Chief Super Bowl this year, I'm not, even with the way they've looked at times, I'm not super I'm not going to tell you that's definitely not going to happen. That's all I'm going to say. It could still certainly happen. And then I want to talk about the Bears for a minute because what a disastrous last few weeks, man. I mean, it's hard to have a worse last few weeks than the Bears have had. The offense cratered again after a few weeks in a row of good play against really bad defenses, which again, you should beat teams like that pretty comfortably, but still, it was a good sign. And then they kind of cratered again. Caleb Williams, to his credit, has tried to battle through, but I just don't think that this roster and this offense are playing well enough around him for him to have a chance as a rookie. He is compounding it with some bad mistakes and trying to hold on to the ball too long, and not even in a playmaking way, but almost kind of, to me, almost in a stubborn, I want to try to make a play from the pocket way at times too. It's this weird combination where he's either holding it too long or not playmaking enough. It's a weird thing. Shane Waldron is fired. Graceful, that's so important to just get that out of the building right now because the negativity surrounding him was just horrendous. You cannot continue to employ him as the offensive coordinator. I don't know how much better it's going to be under. I think it's Thomas Brown is taking.
Oh, did they actually fire Shane Waldron?
Yeah, they got rid of him. Yeah, as the offensive coordinator. So I think Thomas Brown is going to be taking that over, which I believe he was the Panthers offensive coordinator briefly a while back.
Okay.
So he has a little bit of experience calling plays, but it was so bad. I mean, Keenan Allen, DJ Moore, and Rome Odunze should not be this bad of a receiving trio. DJ Moore's done absolutely nothing. Allen looks old and not really that great anymore. Odunze's had his moments, but has mostly been kind of kept in check. It's just nothing that we kind of expected it to look offensively. And the defense has been good, but they've also had their bad moments. And I think Eberflus is staring down the barrel very quickly of not having a job here in a few months.
Well, I'm amazed he made it to the season with the whole Justin Fields fiasco. He was able to blame it on the OCs again, and we see where Luke Getsy is now, and it's still an issue. But I think the bigger thing that's concerning for Chicago is things look so good before the bye week. The game against Carolina, the game against Jacksonville, even some of the highlights of the Los Angeles Indianapolis games, you saw Williams slowly getting things back on track. Yeah. And then he blew up in those games. And then they hit the bye week. And that's when everything went downhill. And that's really troubling because that's supposed to be opposite. Is when you come out of your bye week, you have the whole week of rest. You're supposed to be able to practice, get some things back, whatever. And it was like they were on this positive track, and then all of a sudden they come back. They get hit with the Hail Mary against the Commanders. They get dogged by the Cardinals. They get shut down by the Patriots. So it's definitely not looking great. I don't think you bench Williams. You let him keep playing.
I've heard some talks about that. I will say the only reason I would consider it is if you think he's going to get either himself hurt or he is hurting himself by playing. Because I think there's a level to how, like, the whole Anthony Richardson thing, for example, when he got sat down before now coming back this week, there's probably a lot of elements of, like, was it kind of a mini suspension because of taking himself out of the game? Was it a way for them to try to reset his kind of?
Well, if it was a kind of mini suspension for taking himself out of the game, the optics from the Colts were really weird. If that was the case,
I'm just saying, like, I don't know what all went into that, but like, there's an element of, like, Bryce Young where he was clearly overwhelmed. You sit him down for a bit and then put him back in. Like there's an element of that potentially with the Bears here, but I don't know if really Williams is in that boat per se.
And I don't
the offense isn't working. So
I don't think the problem is Caleb Williams is not ready to play. I think there's no cohesiveness in the offense whatsoever.
No,
and they're grasping at straws.
There's a lot of bad stuff going on.
And I mean, kind of it goes back to, I mean, again, I'm still a little surprised Eberflus still had his job after last season and just what had happened the previous seasons beforehand. But I mean, eventually something has to change. So it'll be interesting to see what happens over the, I mean, like Tyson Bagent's not going to, I don't think that they're 4-5, but they are also in the NFC North.
Yeah.
So
I think that they should try to simplify the offense under Brown, try to get Williams into some sort of rhythm before the end of the season, and then you hope that you can find a head coach that preferably, and I've kind of eased off of this a little bit. I've been very much a pro, like, you should be finding an offensive mind to be your head coach, specifically if you have a young quarterback. I think I do agree with that with the Bears, but specifically because of what's happened this season, you have to find somebody who can be the offensive play caller. And unless he ends up not working out as a head coach, is going to stay the offensive play caller for years, because you don't want him to go through 3 or 4 offensive coordinators in his first few seasons, like you see a lot of young quarterbacks end up having to do. So I do think for them finding someone, we're going to talk about a lot of coaching candidates over the next few months. We do different shows on different teams, but Ben Johnson is obviously the first one to come to mind. Somebody like that. Now, I don't know if he would want that job. He didn't want the Commanders job, which, granted, there's a lot going on with the Commanders that's not football related at the time, so maybe that's why. But in general, like, someone in that mold that can hopefully be the play caller and the head coach and then stay that way for a long time with him. So, Zach, you look terrified.
I was looking at standings and saw the Panthers' point differential, and Jesus.
Yeah, they had some rough early games, so they're never climbing out of that hole. Let me put it that way. Tough scenes.
There's a lot of really bad negatives.
Yeah, it's not a great. And that's one of the reasons we're doing this Saving the Franchise Project. Franchise Savior Project is what I'm calling it. The old FSP. That's what we're going to refer to it as. Speaking of which, we're going to jump into that now. So we're going to start this week, like we mentioned before, with the Jacksonville Jaguars. Right now, again, 2-8 on the season.
Hello, Governor. Starting with the Jacksonville Jaguars.
There you go. Will we move them? We're not going to talk about that.
No.
But whatever. I did admittedly in the doc. I did say I started by saying Jacksonville Jaguars.
Oh, that's what that means. I had no idea what that was.
Zach, you didn't even get it. Oh man. Anyway, no. the jokes for London Jaguars is always there. It's a funny thing, but
no, the NFL's going to put a brand new franchise over there if they do that.
That's what it would probably be. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, but we're going to talk about the Jacksonville for now, at least Jaguars. Again, like we kind of started off with it, and before we jump into the specifics of anything, this is a team to me that just kind of feels like they don't know how to win. They simply don't have a culture right now. And Doug Peterson famously said earlier that they need to find a culture. As the head coach, he said that. It's like, buddy, kind of supposed to be you. I don't know if you know this, but that's kind of usually who gets the credit for this type of thing. So what are you talking about? So that was a funny quote, but no, they just don't have a winning culture in Jacksonville. They really haven't for a long time. And really rarely during their time in the NFL as a team have they. There's the early successes they had, kind of the mid 2000s were a fun time for a little bit, a couple of years there. But it's been a lot of bad in between those times, and specifically not just bad, but like some of the worst teams in the NFL over the last decade or so have come out of Jacksonville. So we're going to talk about specifically how we got here. And I think where we want to start, and, I have a whole spiel about this, Zach, you can kind of chime in on, what you agree with, what you don't. But let's go back to 2017 for a second. We all know that was the Saxonville defense, the resurgent Jacksonville Jaguars under Blake Bortles of all people, who had maybe his only real truly good season in the NFL as a starting quarterback. They make it all the way to the AFC Championship game, lose the Patriots in kind of weird fashion where there's some stuff happened in the game where people were like, maybe they got screwed a little bit, whatever, right? They get to the heights of the AFC title game. Then it all falls apart immediately. It completely falls apart from that point. There's no upward momentum anymore. They got to that high and it immediately fell off the mountaintop. You look at their record. They were 10-6 that season. They were the division winners in the AFC South. Again, they make it all the way to the AFC Championship. Since then, including this season, they have a record of 35-74. I mean, if you lose more than twice as many games as you win, you're not doing well over any stretch of time. They have one playoff appearance in that time. It was the weird Chargers games, and then the Chargers game where they come back from like 27-0, and then the loss to the Chiefs. Yeah, the loss to the Chiefs. And honestly, really, they played them tough. They honestly looked like they were doing pretty good. And once again, it all kind of came falling apart, specifically this year. Again, like 9-8 seasons back to back. The last 2 years before this year, one with the playoff appearance, one last year when they crashed and burned.
It's important to note that they were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 and 8-3, and then proceeded to lose 5 of their last 6 and missed the playoffs last season,
to a Titans team that was dead in the water. To end the season. So again, it's been really rough for Jacksonville since that 2017 season, and there's a lot of reasons for that, right? It's never just one reason when something like this happens. One thing you have to say, the drafts have been really rough since that season. You go back to 2018 draft, you take Taven Bryan in the first round, you take DJ Chark, who had a couple seasons of good production, but really only one that was anything, outstanding. Really didn't get anything from the top of that draft. You go to 2019. You do hit on Josh Hines-Allen. You hit on Juwan Taylor, who's a good tackle before he moves to the Chiefs. Quincy Williams has been great, not for them, but for the Jets. Not really much out of that class either. And then you get to 2020. This was the one that hurt a lot. Top 3 picks, C.J. Henderson, Caleb Von Chason, Laviska Shenault Jr. Bust across the board. It's just been a lot of that in Jacksonville. Right, like they cannot get the premium talent in with their high picks that they get every year. Then you get to 2021, you have a terrible season. You go, I think 1-15 the year before. It's Trevor Lawrence and Travis Etienne at the top of the draft. Well, Tyson Campbell as well, who's been up and down, but a good corner for them. Like that draft is still kind of up in the air.
But the Etienne pick was always questionable because they had I forget his name. Undrafted free agent.
I can't think of his name either. You think I would know? I do know who you're talking about, though. Yeah, for sure. That pick to me is less about.
That was 2020.
2021 is when they drafted Etienne. Specifically,
James Robinson.
Yeah, James Robinson. Yes, exactly. So the thing with that pick for me was less about James Robinson having such a good season, because obviously he ends up kind of falling apart due to injuries and everything else.
Yeah,
it's that when you're a team that is as bad as the Jaguars,
there's other needs than running back at 25th overall.
Exactly. And I think that there's a key difference between not taking a first round running back at all as a team, like that philosophy, and not taking one when it clearly isn't a need, for one, and two, it's not going to move the franchise forward. Because as a running back, especially, if they were as bad as they were, unless they think they were going to get really good really fast, which they did have the playoff season a couple years later, he's not going to probably be around by the time that you're good, because running backs don't last as long as they used to in the NFL, or they don't.
Unless your name's Derrick Henry.
Yeah, I mean, if I was like 6'3" and 245 pounds, I'd probably last a long time too in the NFL. But now, it's crazy. Yeah, he's kind of the exception there. But yeah, that draft, like, Lawrence has not lived up to the hype. I'm not saying he's a bad player. We're going to get to him a little bit more, talking about him and what he kind of means to the team moving forward. But again, you don't get a ton out of this draft either. Like, Walker Little has been in and out of the lineup. He's played pretty well overall when he's gotten a chance. Andre Cisco is also in that draft, the 65th pick, currently on the team still. He's having a rough year, so who knows if he returns. You go to 2022, Trayvon Walker over Aiden Hutchinson. That is
it's a rough pick, but he also hasn't been awful. I don't think it's necessarily Hutchinson has vastly. I mean, he's like one of the best players overall in the entire league. I don't feel like Trayvon Walker's been bad. It's taken him a couple seasons to get like to the point where he needed to be, but I would definitely say he is a very, very crucial part of their pass rush with Josh Hines-Allen.
Yeah, and if you look at him statistically the last 2 years, he looks fine.
Yes.
You watch him on tape.
It just took a little longer.
He's a bottom tier starting edge rusher in the NFL to me on tape. He plays a ton of snaps. He gets a ton of production in terms of like tackles and everything else. He does not win as a pass rusher almost ever. It's almost always someone else winning and him getting around the edge because of stunts and other things. It is not first overall pick worthy. So I get what you're saying, but he to me is one of the worst 10 edge rushing starting players in the league currently overall, especially if you were to look at it on a rate basis. Just isn't there. And again, this was a guy that came out of Georgia, and he is a great athlete, but he didn't rush the passer actually most of the time in Georgia. And yeah, in a couple of years, if he keeps playing all the snaps he's getting, he could become an actual, like, legitimately good pass rusher, not just an athlete who you can use on stunts and things like that. But you don't take that at first overall, right? You just don't. And the Jaguars, and Trent Baalke specifically, which we'll talk about him a little bit too, he fell into that trap. And again, the production's been fine, but
did they trade for that pick?
No, they were 3-14 the year before, if you remember. They were really rough.
They had back-to-back first overall.
They did. It doesn't happen much, but it definitely did. They definitely managed to do it. And then you go into 2023 then, that draft. Anton Harrison has been rough as a starting tackle. I'm not saying that he is like not playable or anything like that, but he's not been what you want as a first round offensive tackle. Brenton Strange has done nothing as a tight end. That was always a weird pick to me. Tank Bigsby's been really good recently. So I
think actually that's arguably where you should have been drafting a running back when you took ETN.
Realistically, yeah.
Third round, 25th pick, like that.
Yeah, but again, you're not getting a lot of impact players out of these classes. Brian Thomas looks like a huge hit so far.
Yes.
Jerry Jones has been okay as a rookie so far as a DB in the third round. But you're not getting enough out of these classes to be able to elevate your roster with the draft. And no matter how much free agency is fun, no matter how much it is, like how cool it is to like go and get a big name player in free agency, the NFL is built off of the draft. Good teams draft well, they retain their players, and they fill in holes with free agency that they can't fill in the draft. Whether it's because they haven't succeeded drafting that position, whether it's because they don't want to spend high draft capital on position, whatever it is, they find ways to supplement the roster with free agency, but they don't build it off of free agency. And unfortunately, the Jaguars, even when they've hit on some free agents, like you look at the way Evan Ingram has played for them, coming over from the Giants, Christian Kirk, just to name a couple guys, it hasn't been enough because the rest of the team isn't good enough to supplement that, right? And so that's kind of the key thing. And we're not going to get into draft stuff today just because I promised Zach I would not make him do that. So we're not doing that. But that's where this kind of has to turn around for the most part. I
think I can make a first overall pick for them.
Yeah. I mean, my point though is like that's not how we're going to focus on.
Yeah.
If you want to see stuff like that, we will have a draft podcast soon on this channel. With myself, with Dalton, who you've seen before, and of course Jake as well. We will be doing some draft stuff here starting at the end of November. So that's where you can start to see maybe some draft stuff for this team. But again, like just the poor decisions in the draft. Free agency's been up and down, but it's been minorly successful in general. But Trent Baalke has just been really bad as the GM for this team over the past years. Just hasn't done a good enough job. You can talk about the Urban Meyer hiring years back and how disastrous that was. Doug Peterson comes in and at first looks like, okay, hey, we got something here. We got this figured out. And now it's slowly as it has happened for him. You start hot with Doug Peterson, you end poorly with Doug Peterson. That kind of is the book on him right now, and we're seeing that play out. Whoever the next coach is, they have to focus on getting a winning culture built up as soon as possible. We're going to talk about that exact thing here coming up next. Before I jump into coaching staff, front office, and stuff like that, Zach, any other thoughts you have on how we kind of got here with the Jags?
Everybody talked about the Baalke hire when it happened and how questionable it was. I mean, the guy has a very, very, very spotted history in with previous destinations, and it feels like that. What stops, again, you talked about the culture. What stops a lot of franchises from getting better and having any improvement is that it's just so deeply instilled into the culture of the team that even though you brought in a Doug Peterson to replace an Urban Meyer, okay, you got a little bit of the good, but just how bad the organization is and the lack of actual football basics and not even football basics. I guess the question becomes, and I think you see this with a lot of owners, how much does Shad Khan care about football?
Yeah.
And I think you're seeing some of this with some of the owners who care a bit too much and are one name I can think of right off the bat is Dan Snyder. Man cared way too much. He needed to turn it over to other people. He cared about a lot of other things way too much. But you have to acknowledge that if all of this is a business venture for you, which if you look at Shad Khan's history since owning FC Fulham, that's not been great either. They've been relegated at least once during his ownership. So I guess the question becomes, what does he want for this team? And what you should want is for the on-field product to be as positive as it is. And then if that's the case, you need to identify somebody, whether it's somebody from previously in your franchise or if it's somebody in the league that is well-respected, to come in and take over for football operations and be the person to actually run this business from a football aspect. As a Dolphins fan, I really wish that Stephen Ross would stop doing that and do the exact same thing. I mean, Dan Marino's in the building. Let him do more. Why he's not, but you need to find that person that lets the owner be the owner, who should not really be involved in day-to-day stuff and involved in the team sayings in London and all this stuff, and let the football guy run the franchise and start with making a smart decision for a GM. And then we talk about coaches and all that stuff. But when you get down to the nuts and bolts of this franchise, it seems like there's a lack of direction and overarching idea of what they want to do. And you eventually are going to have to bring somebody in who lives, eats, and breathes football to do that. I mean, I'm sure when we get Dalton and Jake on here, that's what they're going to say about Davis and Brady. It's just let them take over. You just have to, eventually you have to admit that, no, I don't know what I'm doing. And I need somebody who understands football to take over this and be the person in charge.
Yeah, I agree with that entire sentiment. I think too many owners who don't have the football acumen that they think they have to try to get too involved in decision making. Obviously, they're the owners, right? They're going to decide things like that. But I think their job should be to find the best people who can then make those decisions and not necessarily put it all on themselves to make a lot of those decisions.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. And I think, obviously I don't know the specifics of what Khan does and what he doesn't do, but his track record has not been good. So I think something, whatever that means, needs to change with how he's kind of operating the organization. Speaking of which, let's jump into some GM / head coach / other moves that we'd want to do if we were the owner of this team. And I can kick us off. I have a kind of how I chose to do this, Zach, and I left it up to you guys to kind of build this how you want to build it out. I have built essentially a head coach, GM, coordinators combo for my section. So I have a first choice and a second choice, and then some other names to consider here in different roles that we can throw out. So for my first kind of coalition of people to bring in to kind of run the organization as a whole, my head coach choice, I know this one's a little bit cheating because I don't know, and honestly I think he won't end up being available unless things really bottom out. And this is a team we're also going to talk about at some point. If Brian Daboll were to be fired, he would be my first choice as head coach of this team, specifically for two reasons. One, because of his track record with big, talented, athletic quarterbacks like Trevor Lawrence has been and is. That ability to run an offense with that skill set where he's big.
You're telling me he can have a Daniel Jones that can throw?
Pretty much, right? People like to compare Trevor to Daniel Jones statistically, and it's like that's not really fair, but I get what you're trying to do.
Shout out my girlfriend who just came in and is watching us. Thank you, baby.
There you go. Yeah, thanks for popping up here, Aaron. Thanks. But in general, like he is exactly the kind of coach that I think Trevor Lawrence needs, right? Like who knows how to use that skill set with his time with Josh Allen in particular. Tried to do it with Daniel Jones, but Daniel Jones is, ass. So it's kind of hard to do that. Yeah. Kind of had a little bit of success at first, obviously, right? With that playoff season, but it's still whatever. Point is, I think he'd be great for Lawrence in particular, and he obviously has the head coaching experience with the Giants, although it is very much up and down. I think a lot of that has to do with the roster and the talent around him in general as a head coach, and also Joe Schoen has been iffy as a GM. Yeah. So it's the GM. We'll talk about them in a minute, but I think Daboll would be a really good fit for that. And also, I think he could bring a fieriness to this organization that they have not had in a long time. Like you see, granted, in some ways, some of the outbursts on the sideline stuff is kind of a bad look in some cases. I think for a team like the Jaguars, they need somebody to care. They need somebody to truly care so much that they do get that angry and that upset when things aren't going well. And I think in the right situation, that way can actually work in your favor. And I think the Jaguars could be a team that could use that type of thing. To pair with him as a GM, one that I really think is going to get a job here this next offseason, potentially, unless he wants to kind of stick around in the same way that another guy for this same organization is stuck around longer than people think. Ray Agnew, the assistant GM of the Detroit Lions.
Okay.
Been there since 2021. He has worked with Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell to build up this roster, and what a job that they have done as a unit. Yes. Obviously, we're seeing that right now. And I specifically targeted him because I think he has the right mentality from that organization of how you build a team out. You have to build up the trenches. The offensive line for the Jaguars is either old or not that good in really every spot that they have right now. So they really need to build that unit up. So he would be a really good fit to try to do that. The interior of the defensive line needs built up. They've done a good job with that with the Lions. They know what you need to target in order to try to build up a roster that can sustain winning at this level, right? He would be my top choice. Now, I don't think he would choose the Jaguars. So that's kind of why I'm I don't know about that. But that would be, if I was owning this team, I'd be calling his phone and be like, hey, what's it going to take to get you in the building here?
Yeah. That's very interesting. So obviously this goes with, if I were Shad Khan, the first move that I would be making today is firing Doug Peterson.
Of course, this is all with.
I don't care who you put in charge.
This is all with the caveat that, of course, everyone's leaving this organization that's currently in it.
And I guess so. The interesting part could be, though, there could be a chance that Balky stays.
To me, if I'm again, so we're doing this. Yes, if we're doing this ourselves, I am with the cat. He's gone.
Yes.
If he does stay, that creates a whole other issue. But for me, I'm just going with him not being on.
So, and like, that's why my first guy, I mean, eventually Ben Johnson's going to have to get a job.
Yes.
He's going to have to get a head coaching job. And it's interesting that you point out Agnew, because if he takes that GM position, then that makes that very attractive for Johnson to go there and work with somebody who he also has been working with the past however many seasons Dan Campbell's been with the Lions. Well, actually, no, it would be one less because he wasn't there the first season.
Not the first season, no.
Yeah. So it's very interesting. I guess, though, if they were to keep Balky or like that the GM is undetermined or whatever, which typically when you go through this, you hire GM first, right?
Ideally, yes. If you don't if you're firing both of them, you want to get that GM in place because he's going to be the one that probably initiates that coaching search in a lot of ways too.
Yes.
So ideally, if they do clean house, which we certainly hope for Jaguars fans' sake that they do, I do think you start with the GM, in which case he probably would try to get Johnson here. With the way Johnson has approached the hiring cycles that he's been a part of, I just don't know if Jacksonville is going to be an option for him.
Well, I think it highly depends on who's in the front office.
Of course, right. But even if Agnew goes there, it's like, I don't know. It's weird. It's really hard to place Ben Johnson. Let me just put it that way.
Yeah.
I chose not to do it with the Jaguars because I think there's other jobs that are going to be more up his alley, but that definitely could work out for sure.
But if it comes to like needing to instill a culture and like getting like an actual like winning football tough culture, if I'm Shad Khan, I am going to go ahead and give Mike Vrabel a phone call and say, hey, these guys got to toughen up. I need some winning attitude. What you got for me? Because that was the thing that we learned about him last season, is that the Titans were like, hey, we're rebuilding. And he was like, absolutely not. I am winning.
Pass. Yeah.
If the letters WIN are not involved, I am not a part of it.
Fair.
So I think he would be very good if you're thinking of a short-term coach of trying, like, while you're trying to find and work on the books and get everything redone. But you would also need to pair him with a very solid GM to do the team building side as well. And again, I mentioned it
has to be somebody that he respects specifically too, because that was part of the issue in the past with the Titans.
Yes, so. And I don't have my pulse on the GM candidates like I do people for head coaching and areas like that.
You're good. Yeah, I got you covered on that one. So it's funny you bring up Vrabel. I will also be bringing him up shortly. Okay. But to finish out my first choice, like my kind of coalition that I want to put together in the case of if I get exactly what I want. This one's a little bit probably won't be super familiar for some people. Now some people might know this person for not coaching, but even that maybe not. My offensive coordinator choice for him, if you were to bring in Dable specifically, is Davis Webb, the Broncos quarterback coach currently. He was a player for the Giants and the Bills at different points in his career.
Yeah.
If you remember him at all, didn't really play at all or play much.
I know the name now.
Yeah. Former Texas Tech quarterback, and I think a couple other schools as well. He has been getting a lot of love in the coaching community for a while now. The reason he's even the quarterback coach for the Broncos is on the recommendation, I believe, of Brian Dable and guys that coached with him and played, or that he played with and with Buffalo whenever he was part of that. Roster for a while there. So I think he'd be a guy that, because Dable's going to handle play calling most likely, he would be a guy that I think he'd like to bring in and put in the OC role, but would really be more of a just kind of assistant to him. And that may allow him to kind of climb the ranks a little bit faster. And I think that Dable may be interested in doing something like that. He could bring Kafka along too from the Giants, but I don't know if he would bring that staff with him because it obviously hasn't worked out super well. But that's a guy that I think could certainly be in consideration for that if he were to get the job. And then for DC, for me, it's just, if it's Dable coming in, especially someone familiar with Mike McDonald's defense. I don't really care specifically what coach it is. Give me somebody who knows how to run that McDonald's scheme, because we're seeing what's happening with Minter and with the Chargers right now. And like the Ravens aren't looking the same without McDonald. They're like, get somebody who can, specifically because of the players you have, like Trayvon Walker, if you want him to be the best version of himself, has to play in a defense that can better use his skill set as just an athlete. And with the way McDonald runs his defense and the defense is run with all the stunts and different things you can do out of different alignments, I think it would help unlock him a little bit more. Hines Allen would get more unlocked as well, even more than he already has been. The defensive line and the interior would improve from that as well, because they've already kind of shown that they don't have a lot going on there. It just makes a ton of sense to me to find someone from that kind of coaching tree to come in there.
Yeah, definitely.
So, and that's my first kind of wave of hires I'd be making if I had my choice. Now, the second one is a little bit one more kind of up the alley that you were kind of going, mostly the head coach. Mike Vrabel is my second choice, because I'm going in this case purely for I need somebody in the building who I can trust, that knows what he's doing, knows how to build a winning culture, and takes this stuff seriously, right? We know how serious Vrabel is about winning. He's not going to do anything except try to maximize this team's chances of winning right away. And for a team that needs to get out of the gutter, that is 100% fine. I don't know if Vrabel's the guy I'd be hiring if I was trying to maximize the upside of my team, but if I need to get my team up to a standard, to an NFL actual standard, not many guys would call first besides Vrabel, right? So that's definitely one of my choices there. For GM in that case, this is somebody who I think would be an interesting move, and I think this could be something that this guy has been in talks for GMs before. He never actually done it. It might be a combination of not wanting the jobs or just losing out to other people, but this would be a big pull away from a division rival. The assistant general manager of the Colts, Ed Dodds, is who I would be looking to bring in here. Ton of experience in the NFL in different capacities as a scout, as assistant GM with under Chris Ballard with the Colts. They've done also a great job of building up the offensive line in particular, right? That's something I'm really focusing on with this team, because you need to find that stability offensively. He'd be a really good fit, I think, in that way. As an offensive coordinator, I'd want to bring in somebody who can kind of get more of the easy stuff going for Lawrence and kind of settle him down a little bit, because I think that's been part of the problem, is he feels so much pressure to perform and so much pressure to make big plays that sometimes he does play at a really inconsistent level. Somebody like Mike LaFleur, who's currently the offensive coordinator with the Rams under Sean McVay, so he's obviously not actually calling plays, but he is part of that offensive staff, was the Jets offensive coordinator for a year there before they kind of moved on to the Rodgers situation. Obviously is Matt LaFleur's brother, I'm pretty sure it is specifically. Has obviously ties to him from that perspective. I think that system that they run, that Shanahan-esque system, would be a really good fit to get Lawrence kind of to a baseline of play and help him kind of develop a little bit further. And then for defensive coordinator, the last guy here, this is actually a kind of a deep pull that I tried to find for someone who could be looked at for Vrabel's staff. Terrell Williams, who is the Lions defensive line coach and run game coordinator currently. He was the assistant head coach under Vrabel in 2023 with the Titans. So he's familiar with him. I think that he'd be a guy that might be able to come in and be the defensive coordinator, which would really, with Vrabel being there, kind of work with him together a little bit too as well. So I think that would be my staff if I was bringing in Vrabel in that case.
Okay. Yeah. That sounds solid.
So that I think either of those staffs I think would be a huge one upgrade from what they currently have, because almost any staff would be right now with the way Peterson is coaching. And I think it would give either, in the case of Dable, the chance to really truly develop Trevor Lawrence, or in the case of Vrabel, give your organization the chance to get up to the NFL standard of winning and actually understand how to do that, right? So either one I think would be a good fit from that perspective. Any other thoughts about my picks, or any other thoughts you want to throw out there?
No, I mean, I basically had the head coaching throughout. But yeah, no, that I mean, that all makes sense.
Yeah. A couple other head coach names to throw out. I don't think that he should do this, and I don't think they should do this, but I wouldn't be shocked if Bill gets a call. Of course, Belichick. Kind of to me, I'd rather have Vrabel at this point if I'm going that direction. Liam Cohen, Bucs offensive coordinator, has done a really good job for the Bucs this year. We've already seen Dave Canales go after 1 year to be a head coach, so Bucs offensive coordinators could be certainly in demand as long as they're continuing to play or coach at the level they are. Yeah. And this one is kind of like a mix of you're going offense, but you also still want somebody who's a little bit older and a little bit more I think just doesn't give a shit kind of, and has that energy of what we're just going to get it done. Todd Monken of the Ravens offensive coordinator. I think he could be looking at a couple of openings this offseason as well.
Also, I mean, if they want to do this, I don't know if they want to do this. I mean, Brian Flores is going to get some calls.
He will get some calls. I still think for his sake, he should probably try to become the next Steve Spagnuolo, personally. I think that would be the best thing for his like kind of legacy to me, but he will certainly get calls. That's definitely going to happen. So you could throw him in there as well. But I'm not sure if he'd be the guy I'd want to bring in from a culture perspective necessarily.
I don't know. I don't know. The more that people talk, the more that it seems like it was slightly a hit job by the Miami front office to kick him out of there.
Oh, I definitely believe that's a big part of it. But I just think that I don't know if he'd be the one I'd be looking at as head coach for a team that is floundering at this level.
I don't know. I from a discipline aspect, he was very good.
True. Yes. But yeah.
I mean, if that's what you need, that's what you need. I don't know.
But no, yeah, definitely him also.
They have Matt Nagy on this list. Jesus Christ, we're not doing that again. Come on.
No, guys. I mean he's done a good job.
Come on.
Chiefs, but yeah, you don't want to do this.
Saleh, I could see getting another shot somewhere.
Yeah, I think he needs to go be a DC again for a while, though. Personally, he'd be a good DC candidate.
For Arthur Smith on this list. This is insane.
Yeah, don't worry about it.
This is.
There's a lot of names on the list if you look around. Yeah, not
absolutely
quite.
Bananas.
But a couple other GM names to throw out too that could make some sense. Glenn Cook, the Browns' assistant general manager. I know that they've had a lot of specific issues, but in terms of building a roster, done a great job. It's just that they made one huge, massive, unbelievable mistake that we kind of all saw potentially coming, but it is what it is. But outside of that,
they can't control injuries on the offensive line.
No. Overall, though, they've done a great job building a great roster, and that's the whole reason why they even considered making that big of a move to begin with. So can't really argue that. And then, honestly, two guys that are probably going to be coming up a lot in the series when we talk about them, Mike Greenberg and John Spytek, which are the assistant general managers for the Bucs. They have done a great job with the Buccaneers. Obviously, they were able to lure Tom Brady in to kind of finish off that roster. They've been able to build up a really strong offensive line as well. So that's another thing that I'm looking at with the Jaguars, like I talked about. And they're just both guys who I think are probably ready to kind of spread their wings elsewhere and kind of see if they can do the same thing elsewhere. So, yeah, those are guys I would want to talk about for sure. Again, any other names that you want to throw out? Otherwise, we can kind of jump into team needs here for a minute.
No, I think that pretty much does it. I mean, the two, Ben Johnson. I mean, obviously, it's going to be a pie in the sky for everybody.
It's just he's going to be on every list, but I don't know yet where I want to place him. So it's kind of
and then
tough.
I think Vrabel makes sense very much so for what this franchise needs, which is just really a dedicated football person.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, if it's not somebody that is in that like young offensive mind ilk or something like that, I think it should be somebody that is a seasoned coach that can at least, again, elevate this team to a point where they know what they're supposed to be doing. They have a culture in place. And then if you need to move off from that guy to kind of hit your ceiling, you can do that. But you have to find something to establish in the first place.
Yes.
So, let's jump into team needs here. I think there's obviously a lot of team needs for a team like this, but the roster isn't barren at all in town. We talked about that. There's certainly some key players that I think you don't really have to worry about too much. But in general, like so I'll start with there's 5 team needs I listed. Now, this isn't in any particular order, although I could order them if I really thought about it long enough. But the offensive line is obviously a huge one. You're struggling a little bit in general, just finding guys, but also some of your best players are either older or are not going to probably be on the team moving forward. Wide receiver, opposite of Brian Thomas Jr., because frankly, Christian Kirk, don't know what his future holds. He's out for the rest of the season. Gabe Davis has been an absolute disaster as a signing, which I think everybody could have told them that. I like Parker Washington as a potential slot replacement for Kirk, but he is obviously a 5th-round rookie from a couple years ago, or 5th-round pick from a couple years ago, so can't guarantee that. And then Evan Ingram as a tight end is really just a receiver, basically. He's been really good, but that's kind of the only 2 guys that you can rely on right now is him and a rookie, which good for them picking Brian Thomas Jr., but you need some more guys around him now, obviously. Cornerback is obviously a huge one as well. Tyson Campbell has been very up and down throughout his Jaguars career, but he is the only real piece they have at corner currently that you trust. Safety has been really rough. Cisco's had a really bad year, unfortunately, Andre Cisco. But again, you might bring him back because he does have a lot of range and maybe he can play better in a different defense. And then Anthony Johnson, I believe, is who it is. Antonio Johnson, right? Yeah, there's a couple Johnsons out there. He's been brutal in coverage, absolutely brutal. Okay, kind of box safety, but you should not be asking him to cover anybody. So you need some reinforcements there. And then interior defensive line. You pay Eric Armstead. He's been fine.
But he doesn't want to play on the inside.
Yeah, that's the other thing. He's technically an interior defensive lineman, but like, really, is he? Like, whatever. It's just not a lot there. Devon Hamilton is fine. He's a good run defender, but he's not offering you anything as a pass rusher. They need, especially, I think, some juice in the interior of the pass rush in particular to kind of help out the edge rushers there. Those are the guys. Those are the positions I would focus on there.
Yes, I definitely agree with you on offensive line and definitely wide receiver. Now, I guess question, because one of my moves for them, what do you like? How do you value Brian Thomas Jr.?
In what way? What do you mean?
Like, what if you were to label him as like wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2, wide receiver, like what do you think his ends like what will he develop into?
I think he'll be the receiver 1 for this team because he has the body type and the skill set to be an outside like X wide receiver as the primary like target. Now, I think that if you could find someone who is a dynamic route runner and separator to pair with him as like so that he could be more of a pure deep threat, which is what he's best at necessarily. Sure, but I think realistically he's probably going to be the best receiver on this team, regardless of what direction.
I was wondering if you think that they should make a splash for Higgins.
So he's a different type of player for sure, but he would still probably ultimately end up being the number 2 receiver there overall, like in terms of role. I think because you think about with Higgins, one, injuries kind of a question mark for him.
Yeah,
and then also Thomas Jr. he just has the true like they both are X receiver skill sets, but different types of athletes.
Yes.
So it's yeah. I mean, he would be obviously great paired with him, but I'm not necessarily looking as high as T. Higgins at receiver, which we'll talk about for agency here in a bit. But yeah, fair question though. But I think Thomas Jr. will be the receiver 1 for this team.
Okay.
Yeah. So we can jump into, unless you will have any differences in team needs, we can jump.
No, I mean they pretty much align dead on.
Yeah, cool. So again, with free agents, I think so. We're not going to focus on like, okay, how much this player going to sign for, all that stuff. Like, we don't really know enough at this point yet with the free agency market. I have guesses on some of these guys, but the Jaguars have a ton of cap space next year.
Well, so that's my thing is given their cap space situation, I feel like this offseason is slightly a bust if you do not go out and sign a top tier player at one of your positions of need. And I mean, like, you look at guys like Trey Smith and Ronnie Stanley, who will likely be available, and they're young. Like DJ Reed in the secondary, like some of these guys who could end up being available. And if you want to give them the money, I mean, that's somebody that you can look at and be like, yo, you will be our franchise cornerstone, all this stuff. And that you're talking about like, hey, that can be an instantaneous, like, we're plugging a hole and we are identifying and we are taking the best of the best right now. Obviously, like, I'm looking at this big list and like there's guys like, okay, I would go T. Higgins over Chris Godwin because Godwin's up in age. How much you really want to give him, blah, 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 blah. But then you also look down like, oh, well, you got a guy like Amari Cooper or even like Stephon Diggs. Are they going to end up with another season with their current teams? So it's very interesting. I think that they definitely, with their cap space though, need to look at the top rated players in those areas that they need to build. And they're like, yeah, no, we're targeting these guys because they're going to have the ammo to do it.
Yeah, and I agree. It's funny you mentioned a lot of the names you brought up are guys I have on my list here. So I'll start with so these are primary free agent targets. I'll start with these. A veteran receiver of some kind. I think ideally, I actually do think Godwin would be my top pick to go there because one, you're probably going to be able to get him for a little bit less money than you would have if he doesn't go back to the Bucs, which I think he probably ultimately does to me. But if he doesn't, if he does choose to move on, you could probably get him for a little bit less than he's actually worth, which should be in the 25+ million range, in my opinion, for receivers at this point, especially. Yeah. So if you can get him on a decent contract, that would be really good because I do think he'd be a great complement to what Brian Thomas Jr. does. If not him, I think taking a flyer on Amari Cooper, getting a little bit older, not having his best season, probably going to be cheaper because of that to a certain degree. And
but then he also does not have the miles.
But still, it is what it is. And then this would be a buy low candidate because of the season he's had, and I think he would still bring something to the offense a little bit. Keenan Allen is not going to get a lot of money after the season. He has had a rough year. But I do think if you could get him for cheap and give him a chance to kind of bounce back on a different team and maybe in a better offense, depending on who you bring in, I do think that's worthwhile too, because he at least gives you something you don't have at receiver right now, especially if Kirk is gone from the slot. So that would be kind of my top guys there.
Another name, because I don't know what they're going to do with him after this season, but Deontay Johnson could also be a candidate.
Yeah. To me, though, I wouldn't want to inject his kind of mentality into the receiver group right
That's
now.
fair. That's fair.
As much as I love Deontay for what he did with the Steelers, he's kind of got some stuff that's known about him. So not sure if he's the type of player.
Right up the Steelers alley.
Yeah, we know that. We have some goofy
talked about that last night.
Yeah, we have some goofy guys. But still, though, I mean, he from a skill set wise perspective, sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you already mentioned this guy as well. Guards is another thing I want to look at, because Brandon Sheriff, I believe, is basically he's into void years on his contract.
He's 32.
Yeah, he's kind of winding down. Getting a true standout guard, I think, would be really important for this team, especially with the way guards have kind of been revalued at a higher level recently.
Yes.
Trey Smith is obviously the big fish there. I think the Chiefs will somehow manage to pay him, because the Chiefs managed to pay everybody. And I think they know they have to. But assuming he hits the open market, he'd be a guy you would definitely want to throw the money at if you can. James Daniels of the Steelers, he seems primed to hit free agency, and I don't know if the Steelers are going to resign him. He had the injury, so he's done for the year, so that will probably kind of lower his value a little bit, which will either make it easier for the Steelers to sign him or make him want to go somewhere else and get paid somewhere else. So he's definitely somebody I'd be interested in. And then this one's a little bit of an under-the-radar one, at least for most people probably. And I think the Colts are ultimately going to sign him, but Will Fries, or Freeze, I forget how you say his last name, but he's had a phenomenal season for the Colts, truly phenomenal. And he's kind of helped make that offensive line as good as it's been. And he is a younger player. He was a late-round pick, so he's probably going to get paid a decent amount of money, because teams will know about him and will see how he's played, but not as much as probably the first two guys I mentioned. He's not as well known of a name, and as part of why I think the Colts are probably going to be able to bring him back for relatively cheap.
Now, if they're not able to get one of the top guys, this would be interesting. I don't feel like from an injury standpoint, but just an overall how long he would end up being in the league standpoint. Okay. If Zach Martin doesn't return to the Cowboys, do you try to talk to him and be like, hey, we're trying to rebuild and get some protection. We'll give you some money. But
he's been pretty rough at times this year. I feel like he's probably retiring.
I think from what I understand, it sounds like he's retiring. But
if he doesn't, then sure, if he's willing to come here, because he'd probably offer enough to be worth it. But
exactly, it's an absolute plan Z. Everything has been exhausted. Hey man, any possibility?
Yeah, from that perspective, I think. And for interior defensive line, there's one name that kind of stood out to me as a guy that could probably be signed for not too much money, but also might want to look elsewhere for more work, because he just isn't getting enough playing time for his team. The Eagles, Milton Williams. He's been a really good interior pass rusher for them on a rate basis this year. Having his best season as a pass rusher by far, playing kind of that third or fourth defensive tackle role for them in that deep defensive line group. I think him as kind of your primary pass rushing interior defensive lineman might be a good signing for relatively cheap if they can get him to come in the building. Yeah, he's definitely a guy I'd be looking at. Corners, you mentioned one of them already, DJ Reed, I think is a huge one that they should be targeting, because he, is still young enough to get another deal for a decent amount of money. He's probably not going to cost as much as people think, just because he, as good as he's played, he is a smaller corner, and those guys just simply don't get paid as much as other guys typically do. And he actually can legitimately play outside corner. So I think he would be a good fit for them next to Campbell. And then if not him, Byron Murphy makes a ton of sense as well. He can kind of play inside out for the Vikings. He's still a pretty young player as well. I think he's not even 27 quite yet. I think he will be by the time free agency hits, but he's a guy that I think has played pretty well for the Vikings and would be an upgrade for the Jaguars, of course, as well. So definitely guys like that.
Yes, definitely. I agree with all that. And the tricky part right now is a lot of players that you look at a list at the moment, but I'm looking at Asante Samuel Jr. He is going to get
he's going to be a Charger. Yeah.
shoot, let me. There's got to be some other people that I'm just like, oh yeah. Charvarius Ward. I will be amazed if the 49ers do not
assume
keep
he
him.
comes back. Maybe he goes on a big contract somewhere else, but I probably with the Niners.
Yeah. So like that's, I mean, even like Javon Holland, like as much as I want to be like, ooh, look at the Dolphins are going to find a way to.
Yeah, the Dolphins better find a way. Let me put it that way. That because you guys lucked out by not having to by being able to replace Minka with him, and you can't really afford to not pay him now.
I will be so mad. I will be so mad.
Yeah, but I'm not worried about him. But
yeah. So that's the tricky part with like doing these like buildups is you're trying to find the right guys to come in and make those plays. I think one guy that could be on the radar for a new team, although I don't know if he would want to leave here because this was kind of a move home. But if you're trying to bolster the secondary and especially safety play, Tyrann Mathieu is still doing really, really well. And he enjoys playing in New Orleans, but money is also a factor, and Jacksonville is not too far away from Louisiana. So
that's certainly one.
There's there's a couple names. I also think it could be worth now. Do you think ETN is on this roster next year?
I think he probably starts the season on the roster, and then they have to decide if they want to make him the lead back again and feature him and try to figure out a way to make him maximized, or do they want to try to sell high on his value if he's playing well and move him?
I have a feeling they might cut ties this off season.
Yeah, I mean, it's been really up and down for him. So
it's been extremely up and down.
It's certainly in the realm of possibilities. Yeah.
Where Bigsby has really shown up really well this season, I think they might go ahead and be like, "Hey, sorry, we have to cut some ties." Who would you look at to bring in as a viable, like, would you just go and try to find somebody to go behind Tank Bigsby, or would you try to sign a big name in free agency?
I think if we're looking to pair with Bigsby, I think realistically, probably what I do is I draft somebody to pair with him, because this running back class is very deep, at least on the surface from what I've seen so far. You could probably get somebody for even less capital than you spent on Bigsby to pair with him. Specifically, there's a bunch of guys I think are going to be kind of later in the draft that are like that more scat back style guys that can maybe do more of that type of stuff for him and help with the speed element from the backfield. So in general, I think that I would just target somebody in the draft that you can get for relatively cheap, because the running back market is not bad in 2025 by any means. You got guys like Aaron Jones, James Conner, Najee Harris might be available. Chubb, I don't know if he comes back to the Browns, and he hasn't looked himself yet, so we'll see. There's guys out here that can make a difference for you, but probably not, unless you're paying up for one of the top guys, you're probably not getting better than you'd get in the draft, in my opinion.
I think one name to possibly be on the lookout and radar for, depending on how the rest of the season goes. Very interesting game for Miami on Monday with their running back group.
True.
If Raheem Mostert is not on the roster next season, I think you call him up and be like, "Hey,
maybe
we would like to pair you."
Expensive, so I mean,
I don't know how expensive he would be.
With the season he's had this year, I think he probably doesn't get much money, unfortunately for him.
And that's
agency after last year. He might get a 2-year, like $18 million contract or something.
Well, he's only on a 1-year contract right now.
Yeah, but I'm saying, like, if he hit free agency last year after the season he had, then he's probably on a big contract. So, but I don't know. It's we'll see. But I think again, running back for me, if it's a team like this who already has a back that's capable and maybe 2 if ETN sticks around, I'm probably spending like a 4th or 5th round pick on a guy that I like in the draft.
Fair.
Probably. And then the only other 2 names I had here were safeties as well. Were Justin Simmons having a really good year for the Falcons. If they don't re-sign him after the season to pair with Bates long term, or at least for the next couple of years, he'd be a really good veteran to have in that safety room. Yeah. And then Justin Reed from the Chiefs also is having a really good season and has been having good seasons for a long time now. Especially with the Chiefs, I think that they could bring him back, of course, but they're going to have some decisions this offseason, so it's possible he breaks free as a safety.
Yeah, and they can't sign everyone, so
no, not everybody. Most of them probably, but not all of them. So yeah, and that's kind of, I think, how we would be looking at trying to build this team up in this offseason. And I think all of these things are realistic for the most part. I really do think. I think this is something the Jaguars can accomplish if they want to do these things. My big thing is obviously the coaching thing is a little bit up in the air because my top guy that I thought would be reasonable is not currently unemployed. So we'll see if the Giants do make that move. If not, I do think still going to Vrabel and doing something along those lines would be a really good fit for them too, though.
Yeah, I definitely they have the ability to do this, but like you said, my biggest question regarding the Jaguars is what is their direction? I don't feel like they have one at the moment, and that's very concerning with wanting to actually like change up the way that the franchise does things and like the overall like foundations of the franchise.
For sure. And again, that's, I think with the off season they would have, if they kind of went down the path we talked about, I think it would at least put them in a position to be able to build something from where it's at right now, where they haven't really been able to sustain any sort of culture or mentality as a team for quite some time. So, but yeah, if you are a Jaguars fan, or if you happen upon this video and you're interested in this type of content, we will be doing this for all the kind of bottom teams. We'll decide how many we want to do these for, but definitely thought it was a fun exercise. We'll see kind of what we want to do for next week. Talk to everybody, see who's available, see who's not, see who we want to do, but should be very fun moving forward doing these.
Absolutely.
Right. Any final thoughts you want to throw out there, Zach, here before we get going?
No, I think we're all good.
I think we covered it pretty good. So we'll see. We'll be doing, again, very similar things for the other franchises there at the bottom of the barrel. So if you are a team or a fan of a team that is ass, I apologize first of all for you. Unless you're the Browns, I kind of don't really care. But everyone else, yeah, for sure. Definitely check us out. We will be doing those, like I said, for the rest of the bad teams this season. We'll be coming back with you next week with one of them, and we'll try to throw out there maybe who it is.